In this demo, I'm going to show you a queueable job example. This is a job that can be used to examine a grand total across a date range. You'll find this in the example materials inside of a class called Order Aggregator. As you might be able to guess from its name, it aggregates order records, or summarizes orders, in other words. Its variables consist of the following: stop date, which indicates the date that the aggregation should stop. This is contrasted with the query date, which is the farthest date backward the class should run. The stop date, then, could be any date after the query date. By default, the stop date is the current date. This way, if the query date is 30 days ago, then you'll get a 30-day range from today's date. The stop date can, however, be set to anything. Effectively, the query date is a start date. The stop date is an end date. The grand total variable stores the accumulated total of all orders that have been counted. Similarly, the grand count variable is just a count of how many order records have been counted in total. The orders collection stores only the orders that pertain to the query date. This single date only flag is a way to configure if, regardless of what's stated in the stop date variable, whether the job should run for only the stated query date. This is primarily for test friendliness in the Apex test class. The constructor only needs to apply the very first time the job is enqueued and initializes the variables that are a part of the class upon first receiving the query date. The execute method, the required method as a part of this implementing the queueable interface, only calls one method, the run method. The run method contains the class's procedure. Let's go through the run method. Each run, there's a system.debug statement here to print where the total and count currently stand. At the very beginning, this will always be 0. Next, check if there are any orders that are already a part of the class. The conditional here to check if orders are empty is here for test friendliness. If desired, an Apex test can be written to set which list of orders should apply to this procedure. In general, in a real run that applies to a live production purpose, this would be empty, though, and then it would be appropriate to run a query to retrieve orders for the given query date. Down below, there's the orders for date method, which runs the orders query. It's very simple. It only retrieves the ID, created date, total amount field value, and in the where clause, the current query date. Next, update the count with how many orders are retrieved by the query. Then, for each order, add the total amount value to the grand total. If the stop date hasn't received a value, usually for the purpose of testing, then the stop date defaults to today's date. This final conditional determines what happens next, if anything. If the query date is not the stop date, and if not running in single date only context, then the context can be reset for the next date in the range by advancing query date to one more day forward, and the orders collection gets reset to have 0 items using the clear method. Then a new job is enqueued using the current object instance as the parameter. Otherwise, if the query date is the stop date, that means that the job has reached the end of the date range. It can output its aggregation. In this case, it only prints this debug statement. In a real-world scenario, it could certainly do something else, like maybe insert some kind of a custom object record, or send a notification to a group of users. For simplicity's sake, I have this debug statement here so that you, the learner, can see this at work in debug logs from within the Salesforce Developer Console. If you'd like to play with this using Execute Anonymous, you can copy the examples at the top of the file that are commented out. I left a note here regarding Developer Edition orgs, which is the kind of org you're probably taking this course with. While the examples above show ranges between 60 days ago or a range of 16 days in the second example, I was often receiving a stack depth exceeded error with these. If you reduce the date range to fewer than 4 or 5 days, it should work all the way through, although otherwise you'll receive errors. In editions that have more capabilities than the developer edition, these larger ranges should work fine. With that review done and out of the way, it's important to take a look at how this class works if this is your first time seeing a queueable job. It looks very similar to any other code you've seen previously. It just executes in a way that's a tiny bit different. When the run method finishes, it may have resulted in enqueuing yet another job. But aside from that, aside from implementing this queueable interface, it's really not that different from any other code.